The first crack echoed through the steel like a gunshot. Workers froze. Concrete dust burst into the air. Then came the screams. Within seconds, one of the largest bridge construction projects in the state collapsed into the river below, sending millions of dollars of steel and concrete crashing into the water. Television helicopters circled overhead. News reporters called it the biggest engineering disaster in decades. But before the dust had even settled, someone had already been blamed. Standing alone in his orange safety vest, 70-year-old bridge worker Thomas Hale watched dozens of cameras point toward him. The project manager stepped in front of every microphone. We warned him his methods were outdated. The chief engineer nodded. He ignored modern procedures. Another executive added coldly. One man's stubbornness destroyed years of work. The headlines were written before the investigation had even begun. The old worker who destroyed the city's future. The crowd believed every word. Nobody noticed that Thomas never argued. He simply looked at the twisted steel resting in the river and quietly whispered, "No, that's exactly what I warned you would happen." Thomas had spent 45 years building bridges across America. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. His hands carried more scars than most people could count. Every scar told a story. Every bridge he had helped build still stood. Young engineers laughed at his notebook. Instead of expensive software, Thomas carried faded graph paper covered in pencil sketches. They called it prehistoric. They mocked him during meetings. One engineer joked, "Maybe museums still use blueprints drawn by hand." Everyone laughed. Thomas smiled politely. He never answered, because experience had taught him something. Concrete remembers every mistake. Steel never forgives arrogance. The new Rivergate crossing was supposed to become the pride of the city. The mayor called it a symbol of progress. Investors promised thousands of new jobs. The construction company advertised cutting-edge technology. Artificial intelligence monitored stress. Drones inspected every beam. Computers calculated every load. Everything looked perfect, except one connection deep inside the central support structure. Thomas noticed it during the first month. Just one detail, almost invisible, but he had seen something similar decades earlier. A bridge in another state. 37 people had died. He still remembered every face. That night, he couldn't sleep. The next morning, he handed the chief engineer a carefully drawn blueprint. "I think we should reinforce this section." The engineer barely looked at it. "We have software for that." Thomas remained calm. "The software hasn't seen what I've seen." The blueprint landed in the trash. Months passed. Construction continued. Thomas kept documenting tiny warning signs. Hairline cracks. Unexpected vibrations. Bolts under unusual stress. Every report disappeared. Executives hated delays. Investors demanded speed. The mayor wanted ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Nobody wanted bad news. Except Thomas. Every evening after work, he returned home and continued drawing. His garage slowly filled with detailed bridge designs. Hundreds of pages. Every possible failure. Every possible solution. His wife had once asked, "Why keep drawing when nobody listens?" Thomas smiled. "Because one day someone will have to." The collapse changed everything. Investigators flooded the construction site. Politicians demanded arrests. Television experts blamed old construction practices. Thomas became the easiest target. His security badge was revoked. His pension was suspended. Neighbors avoided him. Parents pulled children away when he walked through town. His own name became a symbol of failure. Yet every evening, he still returned to his garage, still sharpened his pencils, still updated the blueprints, because he noticed something everyone else had missed. The collapse wasn't over. It had only begun. Engineers believed everything was stable. Thomas disagreed. He quietly drove to the river before sunrise. He watched the current. He studied the surviving columns. Then his face turned pale. The riverbed itself was shifting. If the remaining supports failed, half the downtown district would flood. Thousands of people lived downstream. Hospitals, schools, power stations. Everything was in danger. He immediately called the emergency office. They refused to connect him. "You're under investigation." He called again. Rejected. Again. Ignored. Finally, he drove directly to City Hall. Security stopped him at the entrance. The mayor refused the meeting. The chief engineer laughed. "We're not taking engineering advice from the man who destroyed the bridge." Thomas quietly placed one weathered tube on the receptionist's desk. "My blueprint predicts exactly where the next failure will happen." Then he walked away. Nobody opened it until 6 hours later. Sensors suddenly reported the exact stress pattern Thomas had drawn by hand. Every measurement matched. Every prediction. Exactly. Silence filled the engineering command center. The chief engineer slowly unrolled the blueprint. Every reinforcement, every pressure point, every emergency support location. Everything had already been calculated. By Thomas. Months before the collapse. The room fell silent. Someone whispered, "How is this even possible?" The mayor ordered every available engineer into the emergency operations center. For 16 straight hours, they searched for another solution. Nothing worked. Computer models failed. AI simulations failed. Outside consultants failed. International experts failed. The river continued moving. Then one young structural engineer quietly asked, "Has anyone actually read the rest of Thomas Hale's notebook?" Boxes were brought from storage. Hundreds of handwritten pages. Thousands of calculations. Not copied. Not downloaded. Created entirely by hand. One page contained a complete emergency stabilization system. Another contained underwater reinforcement methods. Another predicted soil displacement after partial collapse. It wasn't just experience. It was genius. Police found Thomas exactly where he always was. Inside his garage. Still drawing. The police chief removed his hat. "Mr. Hale." Thomas looked up. "Is it too late?" The chief quietly replied, "We're here because we need your help." When Thomas returned to the construction site, everything stopped. Reporters watched. Workers stared. The same executives who blamed him days earlier couldn't meet his eyes. Thomas ignored them. He walked directly beneath the damaged structure. He touched one steel beam, closed his eyes, then quietly pointed upward. That cable. Everyone looked confused. "It hasn't failed yet," one engineer said. Thomas answered, "It will." They checked. Micro fractures. Invisible to the naked eye. Exactly where he predicted. Silence spread across the bridge. For the first time, no one questioned him. For the next 48 hours, Thomas led the rescue operation. Not with shouting. Not with ego. Just calm instructions. Move that crane. Shift those supports. Relieve that pressure. Anchor there. Not there. Workers who once laughed at him now copied every word into notebooks. The city watched live television coverage around the clock. Millions witnessed something remarkable. The quiet old bridge worker wasn't guessing. He understood the bridge better than the people who designed it. At sunrise, the final emergency support locked into place. The remaining structure stopped moving. The river stabilized. The flood threat disappeared. The city had been saved. No celebration iraptiv. Instead, thousands of exhausted workers slowly began clapping. One by one. Then hundreds. Then everyone. The applause echoed across the river louder than the collapse itself. Thomas simply removed his hard hat. He smiled and quietly thanked every worker beside him. Weeks later, it wasn't worker error. It wasn't Thomas. Executives had ignored mandatory safety recommendations to save millions of dollars and finish the project months early. Emails proved everything. Even the blueprint found in the trash had been documented. The chief engineer resigned. The project manager was charged with criminal negligence. Several executives faced prosecution. Investors fled. The company collapsed faster than the bridge itself. 6 months later, construction began again. This time, every blueprint carried 2 names. The city's engineering department and Thomas Hale. Young engineers filled classrooms studying his handwritten safety system. Universities taught it as a model of practical engineering judgment. His once ridiculed notebook became required reading. The mayor unveiled a bronze plaque beside the completed bridge. It didn't mention billion-dollar contracts. It didn't praise technology. It simply read, "Dedicated to Thomas Hale, who proved that wisdom earned through honest work can save more lives than pride ever will." Thomas visited the bridge only once each year. He never gave interviews, never wrote a book, never accepted celebrity status. He simply stood quietly at sunrise, watching families cross the bridge safely. Then he smiled, tipped his old hard hat toward the river, and walked home. Because true builders never work for applause. They build so that strangers they will never meet can cross safely for generations. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.